I don't need your process checklist. Clear your desk. Jeffrey Blackwell, the new CFO, didn't even look up from his laptop, just waved his hand dismissively like he was swatting away a fly. Jeffrey, that checklist authorizes $47 million in monthly vendor payments. Without proper sequencing, the entire supply chain. Do you think I don't understand supply chains? He finally looked at me, irritation carved across his features. I've managed operations at 3 Fortune 500 companies. I don't need what is it you call yourself? Director of vendor operations? Air quotes. Actually air quotes. I need people who execute, not people who create bureaucratic roadblocks. I'd spent 11 years building the vendor network that kept Vantage Manufacturing running, relationships with suppliers across 14 countries, payment authorization protocols that ensured compliance while maximizing terms, a reputation in the industry that made vendors prioritize our orders over competitors. And this man, 6 weeks into his tenure, was calling it bureaucratic roadblocks. The Meridian Industries contract specifically requires, "I'll handle Meridian. I'll handle all of them." He closed his laptop. "You're dismissed. HR will process your termination paperwork. Security will escort you out." I stood there, processing 11 years being erased by someone who'd never bothered to learn what I actually did. "Jeffrey, I'm trying to help you understand." "What I understand is that your department costs $2.3 million annually and produces nothing but checklists and approval forms. That ends today." He reached for his phone. "Security, I need an escort to the 4th floor." I could have argued, explained, detailed the intricate web of relationships and contractual obligations that my checklists actually represented. Instead, I smiled. "Thank you for the opportunity, Jeffrey. I wish you success in your new approach." His eyes narrowed. People who are about to be escorted out don't usually thank anyone. "You're taking this well?" "I've learned that some lessons can only be taught by experience. I suspect you'll have a very educational week." Security arrived before he could respond. I gathered my personal items, photos of my fiancé Marcus, a small plant that had survived 8 office moves, a coffee mug from our biggest vendor that said "Preferred Partner." At the elevator, I turned back one last time. Jeffrey was already on a call, probably celebrating his cost-cutting victory. He had no idea what he'd just triggered. 4 days later, at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, I received a text from my former colleague Janet. "Emergency board meeting happening. Robert Kimura from Meridian just joined the call. Jeffrey looks like he might be sick." I was sitting in a cafe with Marcus reviewing wedding venue options when my phone started buzzing with additional messages. "Total payment freeze across all vendors. Nobody can authorize anything. Jeffrey is screaming at IT. Robert just started laughing." I set down my coffee. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "Everything is exactly as I expected." "What does that mean?" "It means Jeffrey Blackwell is about to learn why that process checklist exists." Before I reveal what happened in that board meeting and what Robert Kimura's laughter actually meant, let me pause here. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who didn't understand your work, if you've ever watched an executive destroy something they couldn't comprehend, if you've ever created invisible systems that only became visible when they stopped working, this is going to resonate deeply. We're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers. Every person who joins helps these experiences reach more operations professionals being dismissed right now, more people whose process expertise is being called bureaucracy, more people who need to see that some lessons are learned the expensive way. Hit that subscribe button. Become part of this community. Because what Robert Kimura said in that board meeting is the kind of revelation that ends careers. Let me explain what a process checklist actually controls and why firing the person who holds it creates $47 million problems. My name is Simone Hartley. I was 36 when Jeffrey Blackwell decided my process checklists were worthless. Engaged to Marcus for 14 months. We'd met through mutual friends. He was a civil engineer. I was someone who understood that systems only work when every component does its job. We bonded over our shared obsession with how things function. I'd worked in vendor operations for 15 years, started as a procurement coordinator at a small manufacturer, learned every detail of how supply chains actually operate, how a delayed payment in January can cascade into production shutdowns in March, how a missed compliance form can freeze imports for weeks, how relationships built over decades can be destroyed by a single careless executive. Vantage Manufacturing Solutions produced industrial components for automotive, aerospace, and construction industries. Nothing glamorous. Gears, bearings, precision parts, but essential. Without our products, assembly lines stopped. And without our vendors, we had no products. I joined Vantage when they were a regional supplier struggling to expand nationally. Over 11 years, I built a vendor network spanning 14 countries, negotiated payment terms that improved cash flow by 23%, created compliance systems that eliminated import delays. My process checklist wasn't bureaucracy. It was the authorization protocol that allowed $47 million in monthly vendor payments to flow correctly. Every payment required verification through a sequence I'd designed: delivery confirmation, quality approval, compliance documentation, authorization codes that ensured money went to the right accounts for the right invoices. The system worked because I'd built relationships that made it work. Our biggest vendor, Meridian Industries, supplied 40% of our raw materials. Robert Kimura, their CEO, had been my contact for 9 years. We'd negotiated contracts together, solved supply crises together, built a partnership that benefited both companies. The Meridian contract had specific terms that Jeffrey never bothered to read. Clause 17, Section C, all payment authorizations require verification from Vantage's designated vendor operations authority. Changes to this designation require 90 days written notice and Meridian approval. I was the designated authority, had been since the contract was signed. When Jeffrey fired me, he eliminated the only person who could legally authorize payments to our largest supplier. The clause wasn't buried in fine print, it was on page 3, but Jeffrey hadn't read page 3. He'd looked at my salary, seen an opportunity to cut costs, and assumed everything would continue functioning without me. Some assumptions are very expensive. The first problem emerged on day 2. Routine payments to smaller vendors processed normally. Jeffrey had inherited authorization for those accounts. But the Meridian invoice for $8.7 million sat in queue, unable to complete. The system flagged it. Authorization required from designated vendor operations authority. Jeffrey tried to override it. Access denied. He had IT investigate. They confirmed the authorization protocol required my credentials specifically, credentials that had been deactivated when he fired me. Just create new credentials, Jeffrey demanded. I'm the CFO. I have authority. The system doesn't recognize CFO authority for this vendor category, IT explained. The protocols were designed around specific authorization sequences. Then redesign them. That would require vendor approval. The contract specify that payment authorization structures can't be modified without, I don't care what the contracts specify, fix it. IT couldn't fix it. The system was doing exactly what I'd designed it to do, protecting vendor relationships from unauthorized changes. By day 3, 3 more major payment deadlines had passed. Vendors were calling, inquiring about delays. The accounts payable team was fielding angry messages. By day 4, Meridian Industries called. Not a customer service representative, Robert Kimura himself. I need to speak with Simone Hartley regarding a payment authorization issue. Miss Hartley is no longer with the company. I'm Jeffrey Blackwell, the new CFO. I can address any concerns. Mr. Blackwell, our contract specifies that Simone is our designated contact for payment matters. Are you telling me she's been removed without the required notice period? I'm telling you that I'm restructuring our operations for efficiency. Whatever arrangements existed before will establish new protocols. I see. Then you're aware that under Clause 17, unauthorized changes to payment authorizations suspend our delivery obligations? Silence from Jeffrey. Mr. Blackwell, are you familiar with Clause 17? I'll have legal review the contract and get back to you. Please do. In the meantime, I've instructed my team to hold all pending shipments until this matter is resolved. We have $23 million in components scheduled for delivery this month. I hope your production lines can accommodate the delay. Jeffrey discovered that day that 40% of our raw materials had just been frozen. The board meeting was called for the following morning. I learned what happened in that board meeting from Janet's live text updates, and later from the official minutes that mysteriously found their way to my inbox. The board convened at 8 a.m. Our CEO, Patricia Langford, was present via video. 5 board members around the table. Jeffrey Blackwell, looking significantly less confident than 6 days prior, and Robert Kimura, who'd requested permission to join and address the board directly. Let me understand the situation, Patricia said. Our largest vendor has frozen $23 million in deliveries. Our payment systems can't process authorizations, and our production schedule is at risk. Jeffrey, explain. There's been a technical complication with the transition following Miss Hartley's departure. What kind of technical complication? The payment authorization protocols were designed with unnecessary complexity. We're working to simplify them. The payment authorization protocols I designed aren't unnecessarily complex. Robert Kimura's voice cut through the corporate euphemism. They're contractually required. Simone and I built them together over 9 years to ensure compliance and efficiency. Mr. Kimura, I appreciate your perspective, but internal personnel decisions are your business, yes, but payment authorization structures are our joint business. Robert leaned forward. Can someone please confirm you terminated Samat Hartley without providing the 90-day notice required under our contract? Silence. Jeffrey, Patricia's voice had hardened. The notice requirement seemed excessive for an internal restructuring decision. Seemed excessive, or you didn't know it existed? More silence. Robert pulled out a document, the Meridian contract. Page 3 was bookmarked. Let me read Clause 17 aloud for the board's benefit. All payment authorizations require verification from Vantage's designated vendor operations authority, currently Simone Hartley. Changes to this designation require 90 days written notice and Meridian approval. Failure to comply automatically suspends Meridian's delivery obligations until a replacement authority is approved. He set down the document and looked at Jeffrey. I'm sorry, you terminated your what? Jeffrey's face went pale. Your designated payment authority, without notice, without replacement approval. Robert started to laugh, not cruelly, but with genuine disbelief. You eliminated the one person who could legally authorize payments to your largest supplier, the person who has approval rights in your own contract. We can work around this, Jeffrey started. You can't. That's the point of the clause. Simone negotiated it specifically to protect both companies from exactly this kind of unilateral disruption. Robert turned to Patricia. Ms. Langford, I have enormous respect for Vantage. We've been partners for years, but this situation requires immediate resolution. What are you proposing, Robert? Either Simone Hartley is reinstated with proper authority, or we begin the 90-day process to designate a new authority, during which time all deliveries remain suspended. Patricia looked at Jeffrey. You fired our designated payment authority without reading her contract. You called her process checklists bureaucratic roadblocks, and now we're facing $23 million in frozen deliveries and a potential production shutdown. I was trying to eliminate unnecessary overhead. You eliminated our most important vendor relationship. That's not overhead. That's catastrophic. The call came at 11:23 a.m. Patricia Langford herself. Simone, I owe you an apology. I appreciate that, Patricia, but apologies don't restart production lines. No, which is why I'm asking what it would take to bring you back. I'd been expecting this call since Janet's first text update, had prepared accordingly. 3 conditions, non-negotiable. I'm listening. First, Jeffrey Blackwell is removed from any authority over vendor operations, permanently. I report to you directly, not to the CFO, whatever organizational structure makes that work. Patricia paused. Jeffrey is complicated. The board brought him in specifically for cost optimization. The board brought him in to save money. He just cost you $23 million in suspended deliveries, potential contract penalties, and production delays that will ripple through your customer commitments for months. His cost optimization created costs. Fair point. What else? Second, I receive a formal acknowledgement from the board that my termination was improper, not just unfair, contractually improper. The failure to provide notice to Meridian was a breach that I specifically tried to prevent. That's reasonable given the circumstances. Third, my compensation reflects my actual value. Jeffrey called me bureaucratic overhead. Robert Kimura just explained to your board that I'm the only person who can authorize $47 million in monthly payments. That's not overhead, that's infrastructure. I want my salary increased by 60%, plus equity participation reflecting my operational importance. That's significant. So is what you're losing every day I'm not there. Robert's deliveries are frozen. 3 other major vendors are questioning their payment timelines. Your production schedule is backing up. Every hour I'm not reinstated costs more than my entire annual salary. Silence on the line. You've thought this through. I've had 6 days and 11 years of understanding exactly how critical my role actually is. I paused. Patricia, I'm not being greedy. I'm being accurate. Jeffrey looked at my salary and saw expense. He should have looked at my function and seen protection. Give me 2 hours. I'll present your terms to the board. I'll be available, but Patricia, the Meridian situation deteriorates every day. Robert respects our partnership, but his patience isn't infinite. Understood. She hung up. Marcus, who'd been listening from across the cafe table, raised his coffee cup. You're about to become very well compensated. I'm about to be properly recognized. There's a difference. Same outcome, though. Same outcome. I clinked my cup against his. Better story. The board approved my terms in 93 minutes. I returned to Vantage the following morning, not to my old office, but to a new one on the executive floor, direct report to the CEO, expanded authority over all vendor relationships, a title change to Chief Vendor Officer that reflected the actual scope of my work. My first call was to Robert Kimura. Simone, I heard you're back. With appropriate authority this time. I'm glad, though I have to admit the board meeting was entertaining. Jeffrey's face when I asked about Clause 17, he chuckled. That was worth the flight. You flew in specifically for that meeting? I flew in to protect a partnership we've built over 9 years. If they'd let Jeffrey continue, that partnership would have ended. I needed them to understand what they were throwing away. I appreciate you making it so clear. You built those protections into the contract. I just made sure they saw them. He paused. The delivery suspension is lifted. Shipments resume tomorrow. But Simone, don't let them do this to you again. I don't intend to. I spent the next week restoring normal operations. Payment authorizations cleared, vendor relationships smoothed over, the production schedule stabilized. Jeffrey Blackwell was reassigned to Strategic Financial Planning, a title that meant nothing and gave him no operational authority. He lasted another 3 months before pursuing opportunities elsewhere. I heard he's consulting now, teaching other companies about operational efficiency. I hope he's learned to read contracts first. The wedding planning resumed with significantly less stress. Marcus and I found a venue we loved, set a date for next spring, started building toward a future that finally felt secure. Janet transferred to my team after the dust settled. She'd kept me informed during the crisis, risking her own position to help me understand what was happening. Why did you do it? I asked her one afternoon. You could have been fired for those texts.
Because you spent 7 years helping me learn this job, training me, advocating for me. When Jeffrey started targeting you, I knew it was wrong. The least I could do was make sure you knew what was happening. That meant a lot. You would have done the same for me. She was right. I would have. Relationships matter in operations, not just vendor relationships, human relationships, the networks of trust that make complex systems function. Jeffrey saw my department as bureaucracy. I saw it as infrastructure. He learned the difference.
Here's what I want you to absorb from my experience. Build protections into everything you create, not from paranoia, from wisdom. Clause 17 wasn't a trap I set for Jeffrey Blackwell. It was a safeguard I negotiated 9 years ago to protect both Vantage and Meridian from disruption. The fact that it also protected me was a benefit, not the primary purpose. But when someone decided I was bureaucratic overhead, that protection activated. Jeffrey saw checklists and approval forms. He didn't see the compliance requirements those checklists satisfied, didn't see the relationship continuity those approvals represented, didn't see the contractual obligations that made my role legally necessary. He saw cost. He should have seen infrastructure. If you're building operational systems right now, vendor relationships, compliance protocols, authorization structures, make sure your importance is documented, not just in your job description, in contracts, in procedures, in the architecture of how things actually function. When someone decides to optimize your department, those documents will speak for you. Robert Kimura's laughter in that boardroom wasn't mockery, it was disbelief. Disbelief that a company would eliminate its own operational foundation without understanding what they were removing. You fired your what? 4 words that summarized 6 weeks of executive arrogance colliding with contractual reality. Marcus and I got married 6 months after the Vantage incident. Small ceremony, our families, a few close friends. Robert Kimura sent an absurdly generous gift, a weekend trip to his family's vineyard in Napa. For the woman who makes partnerships actually work, the card read. I framed it, hung it in my new corner office. Jeffrey Blackwell wasn't invited to the wedding. Neither was he invited to the company anymore. Some lessons are expensive. His cost Vantage 3 weeks of production delays, $23 million in suspended deliveries, and whatever credibility he'd built in 6 weeks of tenure. All because he didn't read page 3 of a contract. All because he thought process checklists were bureaucracy. All because he underestimated what a director of vendor operations actually does. If you've made it this far, thank you, genuinely. This experience reinforced what I'd always believed, that invisible infrastructure only becomes visible when it stops working. We're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers. Every person who joins helps these experiences reach more operations professionals being dismissed right now, more people whose process expertise is being called overhead, more people who need to understand that contracts protect them even when executives don't. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with every operations person, procurement specialist, and vendor manager you know. Everyone who's been told their work is just paperwork. Tell them about Clause 17. Tell them about Robert Kimura's laughter. Tell them about the question that summarized everything. You fired your what? Drop a comment with your experience, the process you built that nobody understood, the protection clause that saved you, the moment someone finally recognized what you actually do. I read every single one, usually in my corner office, the one on the executive floor, the one I earned by being exactly as important as I always knew I was. You're not bureaucracy, you're infrastructure. We're building something meaningful here. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. And remember, when someone calls your work bureaucratic roadblocks, make sure the roadblocks are actually load-bearing walls. They'll discover the difference when everything collapses.